Hello everyone. As Greg would say, I'm your dashing host, Kris. And I wanted to do top 3 videos with Disturbing Backstories Part 3, but I can't find it. And I don't know what happened to it, so I got to skip it. It's Saturday night. I've just gotten back. I've been gone for 12 hours. It was a 10-hour work day. I cut my finger really good, so, you know, so you guys should care. So that means at least like the video and subscribe. I have some popcorn. I am going to do this video, do a couple of videos tonight, and then hopefully do nothing tomorrow because I'm just beat. But before I get started, I got to thank the YouTube community. They had a small gathering of about 618 million of us, and we went out. It was for a charity organization, and we went out. It was called Shoe Goes, and we went out and collected money door to door. It was a small town, it was a population of 500 people, and so we all just constantly kept going door to door until we raised the money we needed for Shoe Goes, which stands for Shoes for Goats. And we were able to collect about $1,200, and finally the people just started fighting back. We lost a lot of good people that day. I had to drag Petey away. He'd been hit with a shotgun to the face. I felt bad for doing it, but you know, it was one of those things where it was like, what are we going to do, you know? Petey was just really annoying people because he was getting the most amount of money. Because he's like, goo goo gaga. And they were like, oh, he's adorable. I hate him. Anywho, so we're going to go ahead and get into this video. You got to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, you can't watch the videos. You've been banned by YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever it's called now, MySpace, Lycos, Tripod, GeoCities. You're banned from all of them. Good luck searching for anything on GeoCities. Mr. Jeeves, whatever that one was. Let's just watch the video. I'm tired. I'm sore. I just want to eat popcorn and relax. All right, and a go.
Progressively more disturbing stories, and at the end of each of them, I'm going to share the video that is famously associated with them. But before I get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please ask the like button if you can borrow their car and then return it with the gas gauge on empty.
Don't do that.
Also, please subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications.
Do that for me.
Don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories.
We're coming, Toronto. The band playing this song. I'm on harmonica.
Oksana Malaya was born November 4th, 1983, to very poor and alcoholic parents in the Ukraine. In the winter of 1986, when Oksana was only 3 years old, in a drunken stupor, her parents forgot about her outside in the cold of winter. And because she was locked out, instinctively she crawled towards the nearest source of warmth, which was the family's kennel where a whole bunch of dogs were sleeping. And incredibly, once she crawled inside of this kennel, not only did the dogs allow her to sleep there that night, but they kind of embraced her as one of their own. The next day, Oksana did not go back in the house, and her parents seemingly did not notice her absence. And over the next 5 years, Oksana would stay with this family of dogs, essentially living like she was part of their pack, which meant over those 5 very formative years from ages 3 to 8 years old, Oksana had almost no interaction with humans. Oksana rapidly learned how to behave like a dog and began only walking on all 4s. She would bark instead of try to speak, and she would eat raw meat. By the early 90s, Oksana no longer identified as a human. She identified as a dog. And it was in the early 90s when a passerby happened to see Oksana running around on all 4s in the back of her house in the woods, and they called the police, wondering what was wrong with this person. The police show up, and Oksana's dog family runs out and starts barking at the police to protect Oksana, and Oksana would start barking ferociously to protect herself from being captured. But eventually the police would use meat to lure the rest of the dogs away so they could retrieve the child. When she was taken into custody, doctors saw that she not only had forgotten how to walk on two legs, she also couldn't speak. And doctors were concerned that because she had had almost no exposure to human language for all those formative early years, that she might not actually have the capacity to speak anymore. Oksana was taken to an orphanage where she would eventually learn how to walk on two legs, and amazingly, she would learn how to speak. But despite these incredible gains she made towards re-entering society, her experience living with the dogs had really left a mark on her. Although she could speak, she could only speak in monotone with no rhythm and no intonation, and it was actually...
Everyone in Ukraine, they're like, "What's up, bruv? What's up?" I think that's how they speak in Ukraine.
Difficult to follow what she was saying because of that. A psychologist did an assessment of Oksana and determined that her mental capacity was only that of a 6-year-old, despite being a young adult at the time of this assessment. By the time she was 22 years old and had more or less re-entered society, she finally was able to have a boyfriend, and he didn't know much about her past. But when she decided to show him how easy it was for her to run around and bark like a dog, it apparently scared him, and he broke up with her and did not see her again. Today, Oksana lives on a farm taking care of animals, and she was recently interviewed on a Ukrainian talk show where she says she no longer wants to live like or act like a dog, she just wants to be a person. Here is some footage of Oksana Malaya acting like a dog.
Damn.
After being apart for many years, identical twin sisters Ursula and Sabina Eriksson were finally reunited on May 15th, 2008. Within 24 hours of their long...
Sorry, this just popped into my head. Did anything happen to the parents on the last one for being that terrible? Like, at least a couple dildos and a sock across the head or something, right? Something. Back to this story.
Awaited reunion, the 41-year-old Swedish sisters boarded a ferry for Liverpool, England. They arrived in Liverpool at 8:30 in the morning on Saturday, May 17th, and their first stop was going to the St. Anne's police station, where Sabina would tell them that she's very concerned for the safety of her kids back in Ireland. The police would say, "Okay, we'll follow up," and they got in touch with their counterparts in Dublin, Ireland, who went over to the house and everything was fine. So the women leave the police station on foot and they make their way over to a bus stop, and they ultimately board a bus bound for London at about 11:30 in the morning. So they get in the bus and they start moving, and the driver asks them to take their luggage and put it in the luggage hold. But the women aggressively refuse to give up their luggage, and in fact, they start clutching their luggage against their chest. So the driver starts to feel really uncomfortable about having these two women on the bus, and ultimately decides to just pull over at a service station outside of the city and tell them to get off the bus. They get off, and the driver ends up calling the police and telling them there's something weird going on with these two women. I don't know what's inside their bags, but you might want to come check it out. As it happened, there was already a police officer at this service station who came right over to the women and started talking to them as the bus driver took off. During their conversation, the police officer felt like these two women were not a threat to anybody, and it was just a big misunderstanding, and they let them go. So the officer leaves, and these two women who don't have a car start walking down the highway on foot. Shortly thereafter, a security camera on the highway picks up the two women walking down the median of this very busy highway, and at some point they try to cross the street, and it's obvious as you're watching this video that they're not going to make it. There's so many cars, and immediately Sabina gets hit by a car. Now, Sabina was only grazed by the car, so she was okay, and she and her sister went back to the median of this highway, but enough motorists saw this happen that they called the police. And it just so happened that the responding patrol car that was in the area was being shadowed by a film crew that was filming for a TV show called Traffic Cops. So this patrol car shows up with cameras rolling going, and they're able to get the sisters from the median over to the shoulder on the other side of the road, and they're talking to them like, what's going on? What are you doing here? And on camera, everything seems totally fine. Like, there is no major issues here. These women were just stranded and were making some bad decisions walking down a highway on foot. Then, all of a sudden, Ursula turns away from the officers and tries to run into traffic. And there are cars whizzing by. They have not stopped traffic. And one of the officers manages to grab her arm, but only gets her jacket, which she's able to wriggle out of before launching into traffic, literally leaping into traffic, and gets hit by a huge truck going 60 miles an hour and gets thrown down the road. Literally a second later, as everyone's like, what is going on? Sabina yells, "They're gonna steal your organs!" And she leaps into traffic and gets hit by another car. Immediately, police run in the road, they stop traffic, and they go up to Ursula, who was the first to get hit, and they see her legs are definitely broken, but she's alive. As for Sabina, she was totally...
Only broken? Yeah, she's not just alive, she's lucky as hell. What's wrong with these two women?
Unconscious, and they didn't know if she was going to make it. When the paramedics finally show up, Ursula, who has the broken legs, fights to sit up, and they're trying to tell her, like, lay down, you're hurt, you have shattered legs, you're lucky to be alive, lay down.
Yeah.
She's not listening. In fact, she's violently trying to sit up, and she starts spitting.
I apologize for that crazy witch cackle that I just did, but you know.
At the paramedics and the police, and screaming obscenities at them like they're trying to hurt her, and they're like, we're the police, we're the paramedics, we're trying to help you. At the same time, Sabina regains consciousness, and even though paramedics and police are trying to keep her laying on the ground, she begins fighting her way up and is pushing the police off of her, and finally stands up and literally squares off with one of the police officers and decks her in the face before running down the road. Police would have to run down the road after her and literally surround her as she's got her fists up like she's going to fight anybody that touches her, and they would have to tackle her to the ground and put her in handcuffs just to keep her from hurting herself. Both sisters would be transported to the hospital, and when they got there, they both apparently were acting normal again. Ursula, because of her broken legs, would be admitted to the hospital, and apparently she would stay normal and would eventually make a recovery and would be released. There were no charges pressed against her. As for Sabina, the doctors checked her out, and she didn't appear to have any injuries. So they released her, and she was brought to the police station to be charged for punching the police officer in the face. That day, Sabina would plead guilty to her charges and would be sentenced to 1 day in custody that she served that night. The next day, she was released. So Sabina leaves the police station on foot, and later that night, she's walking down the road when she sees two men walking towards her who were named Glenn and Peter. She stops them and she says, "Hey, I'm looking for a bed and breakfast. Are there any good ones nearby?" And Glenn would say, "You know, it's funny, I own a bed and breakfast. You can stay at mine." Initially, Sabina seemed hesitant, like perhaps this was a trap, but ultimately she agrees, and the three of them go back to Glenn's B&B. Once they got there, Sabina apparently was constantly looking out all of the windows, acting very paranoid, and then at one point she offers the men a cigarette, and the men accept, and she hands them their cigarette, and she's about to light their cigarettes when she suddenly snatches them out of their mouths and says, "Oh, these might be poisoned," and she throws them in the trash. Just before midnight, Peter leaves, and Glenn and Sabina go to sleep in their respective rooms. The next day, Glenn gets up to make tea and food for Sabina, who's downstairs in the kitchen, but Glenn realizes he's out of tea bags. So he goes outside and he hollers to his neighbor Frank and says, "Hey, can I borrow some tea bags?" Frank gives him the tea bags. Glenn goes back inside. About a minute later, Frank recalls seeing Glenn stagger out of the B&B, clutching his stomach, screaming, "She stabbed me." And apparently his last words were, "Frank, take care of my dog," before he ultimately died. Frank immediately calls the police, and Sabina immediately leaves the B&B and takes off running. She gets to a highway, and she's running along the side of this highway, and a motorist named Josh sees Sabina running, and she's clutching a hammer that she's repeatedly hitting herself in the head with as she's running. Josh drives well past her and gets out to try to intercept her, but as she's running past him, she pulls a roof tile out of her pocket and throws it and hits Josh in the head. She runs past Josh, who's now clutching his head and can't stop her.
This bitch is a triathlete.
She gets to this bridge that overlooks another road and she leaps off. It's 40 feet to the ground, and when she hits the ground, she breaks both ankles and fractures her skull, but she lives and narrowly escapes being hit by another car. Eventually, police and paramedics are called, who transfer Sabina to a hospital where she once again is acting totally normal. Nothing like the crazy person that killed Glenn or was throwing roof tiles just hours earlier. Sabina would ultimately be arrested for murdering Glenn, and she would plead guilty to manslaughter, but she gave absolutely no explanation of why any of this happened. It was like she didn't understand and was a different person now. The defense claimed that although Sabina certainly killed Glenn, she should have diminished responsibility because she was suffering from a condition known as folie à deux. It's a French term that means madness of two, and basically it only presents itself in identical twins where one twin has a psychotic break and they transmit their insanity to the other twin. And amazingly, the prosecution accepted this claim, and they only gave Sabina 5 years for her crimes. Sabina would serve her 5-year sentence and was released in 2011, and to this day is a free woman. Here are some highlights from that film crew that captured Ursula and Sabina acting totally crazy on the side of the highway.
Were they taken, I mean, just to be released? How they freaked out? Don't you think there's some responsibility to have them looked at? Like, you know, no, I don't mean hospital, I mean like a mental kind of thing, like 72 hours or something to be looked over, separated and looked over. I've never heard of that before. That is crazy. Wow. I feel bad for the guy with the dog, though. Look after my dog. Oh, it's a terrible thing.
In June of 2011, law student Lauren Giddings was only one test away from completing her dream and becoming a public defender. Even though she had a ton of studying still to do, she had taken off the first week in June to go to her sister's wedding where she was the maid of honor. Right before she left the wedding to go back to school, she joked with her family that she was going to be locking herself in the library and just studying 24/7 and that nobody should get in touch with her. But when she got back to campus, none of her classmates that she studied with saw her at the library. And in fact, when they didn't see her for a couple of days, they started reaching out to her and texting her and calling her to see if she was okay. But she never picked up, she never wrote back, and so no one knew what was going on with her. One of Lauren's classmates would reach out to Lauren's sister and would ask her, hey, have you talked to your sister at all, because we haven't seen her? And Lauren's sister would write back and say, oh no, everything is just fine. Lauren told us before she left the wedding that she was going to be locking herself away and just studying 24/7, so I'm sure everything is just fine. But this classmate wasn't convinced, because this felt very uncharacteristic of Lauren to not study at the library and then not to pick up any phone calls or text messages. So she would call the police and say, hey, can you please go check on Lauren's apartment because I think something's wrong. So a police officer goes over to Lauren's apartment and knocks on the door. Lauren doesn't answer. They try the door, it's locked. The officer goes outside and looks around the outside of her apartment. There's no broken windows. There's no obvious signs of a break-in. And so the officer leaves and says, I can't do anything else unless you guys file a missing person report. So a couple of days go by and there's still no word from Lauren. And at this point, Lauren's family is now concerned and they do file a missing persons report. So the police go back to Lauren's apartment. They try knocking. She doesn't come to the door. The door is still locked. So they get the owner of the apartment building to open up her door. And when they go inside, inside, Lauren's not in there, and at first, it doesn't seem like anything is wrong until they notice her cell phone, her keys, her purse, and her laptop are all still in there. This made the police think there could be something sinister happening here, and so they went to Lauren's friends and family and they asked, does she have any enemies? Does she have any reason to be fearful for her life? Initially they said no one would want to harm Lauren, everybody loves Lauren. But Lauren's sister would say to the police that there was actually one comment Lauren made a year ago that now seemed a little bit more relevant. Lauren had just got back from a vacation and she noticed there were things in her apartment that seemed like they had been moved, like someone else had been here, but no one was supposed to be in her apartment. And so she told her sister, and the two of them talked about it a little bit, but it was quickly forgotten about because there wasn't a reasonable explanation, and Lauren was so busy with school, she didn't pursue it. After police have done a thorough investigation of the inside of Lauren's apartment, they move outside of her apartment and begin scanning the exterior of the building, and they make a huge discovery. An officer who was looking in the dumpster noticed this big black trash bag that looked out of place. And when he tried to move it, it was very heavy, and when they opened it, they found a human torso, and it was Lauren's. Right before this discovery was made, a news crew had shown up outside the apartment building and was trying to interview people that lived in the apartment complex.
I've seen this.
Because they had been tipped off that somebody who was living here had been missing for over a week, and now police were getting involved. They saw what looked like a resident of the building looking visibly shaken up, watching the police doing their investigation, and they went over to interview him. It would turn out his name was Stephen McDaniel, and he was Lauren's neighbor, and he was a classmate of hers in law school. The interviewer asked Stephen, what was your last interaction with Lauren? And Stephen became really focused on how he had not seen her in the last week. And in fact, speaking on behalf of my other classmates, no one's seen her. She must have just vanished. As they're doing this interview, right on the other side of a bush, this police officer discovers Lauren's torso, and the news kind of gets out to the interviewer, they've found a body. And the interviewer says out loud to Stephen, it looks like they found a body. And Stephen just completely changes, and he goes, a body? And then he goes completely silent to the point where the interviewer says, are you okay? And he just stands there looking completely distant before walking away from the interviewer, sitting down with his back turned and hyperventilates before the interview ends. Once this case went from missing person to homicide, the police started searching all the rooms on Lauren's floor. And Stephen's room is right next to Lauren's, so he was the first room they searched. Apparently, as they began searching his room, he was standing just outside the door and sweating profusely and drank over 10 bottles of water. In his apartment, they found a key to Lauren's apartment. And what he would do is whenever she was gone, he would sneak into her room and download her hard drive, as well as steal little souvenirs like small articles of clothing and other things that he would hoard in his apartment. When they went on Stephen's computer and checked his browser history, basically the only things he did on the internet were look at Lauren's Facebook and LinkedIn profiles. But the creepiest thing they found was this camera that was literally duct taped to this long pole. And on the camera were all these surveillance videos of Lauren, because what he would do is he would go outside and he would hoist up this camera and he would film her through her windows in the middle of the night. Stephen was quickly charged with Lauren's murder, to which he pled guilty, and he would openly confess to the details of how she died in court. Most times, he used this surveillance footage to confirm she was not in her apartment so he could sneak in and steal from her. But on the day she was murdered, he would use that camera technique to confirm she was home. And shortly after confirming she was in fact home and asleep, he put on a mask and used his key to get into her apartment and walked right into her room, which woke her up. According to Stephen, she apparently sat up and said, "You need to leave." At this point, he jumps on the bed, and in their struggle, his mask would come off, and Lauren would recognize it's clearly Stephen, and she would plead with him by name to stop. But he didn't stop, and he would strangle her to death. Afterwards, he dragged her into the bathroom and began cutting her up into fairly small pieces. Some of those pieces got flushed down the toilet. The others were put in bags, and only one of those bags was ever discovered, and that was the one of her torso. Stephen was ultimately given a life sentence. Here is a highlight of Stephen's interview when it's revealed that they've discovered Lauren's body.
I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I haven't seen anything. I mean, I've always heard noise outside, but it's just people walking by pretty much. I mean, we just don't know where she is. I mean,
what about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's why we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
So that's going to do it, guys. Let me know what you thought of these 3 stories.
I'll tell you what I think. The third guy, I would like to brush his teeth with a sledgehammer. Like that. Get some of that tartar off. What a dick. Oh, I hope he's being raped brutally with a knife. I meant it. Okay, well, fun time videos are over, I guess. After you hope that someone's being raped with a knife, I think it's probably time to end the video. Oh, wow. A couple of crazy twins. That guy. That was a video. Well, like and subscribe, leave a comment. If you've requested something and I haven't done it, I might have. I feel like I've lost a couple of requests. I do my best to jot them down when I can. A lot of times I see them at work, and then it's hard for me to find those comments again. I might have to do a little talk to text in a notepad or something like that just to save them. But I'm trying. I try to get them out as soon as I can, you know. But I appreciate the time. I sincerely appreciate the support. I just want to say I'm up to 70 subs. And it's weird because I was at 46, not Friday being yesterday, the Friday before. I was at 46 and I jumped up to 70 in just a week. Well, I got 70. I had 70 this morning. So it's kind of weird to see the numbers going up. And again, I'm not Mrballen. Just a guy who reacts to him. Did I have anything else to say? I don't know. If I forget, I'll just put it in the next video, because I think I'm going to do another one. I'm going to get a couple more done tonight, so I can take tomorrow off. Sit around, relax. Be nice. I haven't done that in a while. Okay. Well, I appreciate the support. Really, truly, and the comments, the back and forth that we have, it really is fun, and I'm very happy to see it. It seems like the usual people that I talk to, but please, if you're new, jump in. You're more than welcome to just join in the conversation, and just understand that there's a lot of joking that goes on. Excuse me. A lot of joking that goes on and stuff like that. Just jump in. Trust me, you're more than welcome. You know, it's a good community. I really am thankful for that. So have a good day. I'm going to continue because I'm having a good night. All right? Thank you very much. Video's over. You can go home now.